We've got two 5-round fights at the top of the bill in Miami, Florida at UFC 314, but between those four fighters, not one of them will enter with gold wrapped around their waist. But that doesn't mean that the implications are not humongous, because in the main event, we will have a vacant featherweight championship fight between the former champion Alexander Volkanovski and the surging Diego Lopes. One man will leave as the new undisputed featherweight champion of the world, and in the co-main event, 5 rounds between the number 7 ranked Michael Chandler, looking to halt the momentum of the undefeated in the UFC, number 12 ranked Paddy Pimblett, looking to splash into the top 10 of the lightweight division. We start in the main event of the evening, where Ilia Topuria is not defending his featherweight title, but instead he is giving up that belt to pursue his goals in the lightweight division. Therefore, when the sound of the bell rings to start Lopes versus Volkanovski, the featherweight championship is on the line. So much has happened in this featherweight division in order to get to where we are at UFC 314 for this main event between Alexander Volkanovski, the former champion and longtime great, arguably the greatest featherweight in UFC history, and Diego Lopes, who, while not as accomplished and as accredited as Alexander Volkanovski, is as legit as a number one contender as you can find right now. Alexander Volkanovski made his UFC debut in November of 2016, nearly 9 years ago, and started his tenure in the company 7-0, and the last few victories that would launch him into title contention was a victory over Jose Aldo and a finish over Chad Mendes. And that is where the legacy of Alexander Volkanovski would truly begin to be cemented, as he would dethrone Max Holloway at UFC 245 in December of 2019 to become the new champion of the world, ending Max Holloway's multi-defense title reign. And everyone in the MMA community, including myself, are huge Max Holloway fans, so it was already tough enough to see him lose his title to Alexander Volkanovski. So even though Volkanovski didn't do anything to ruffle the feathers of fans, it's just the fact that he beat one of the fan favorites in the history of the sport that put him on the bad side of everyone's opinions. Then you pair that with a razor-thin split decision in their rematch at UFC 251, where many say, including myself, that Max Holloway should have won the title back that night, but instead Volkanovski got the split decision on the judges' scorecards, and that is where all of the fans started to go against Volkanovski, and again, nothing that he did, he just kept on winning. But then he would have the legendary fight with Brian Ortega. Then he would have the incredible, near-perfect shutout performance against the Korean Zombie. And then in the trilogy bout with Max Holloway in July of 2022 at International Fight Week, he would absolutely starch Max Holloway from minute 1 to minute 25, proving there was no more doubt. There was no more reason to hate on the success and the skills of Alexander Volkanovski, and since then, he's been a fan favorite in his own right for many years now. And after 4 successive title defenses in the featherweight division, he decided to chase greatness and move up to the lightweight division in February of 2023 at UFC 284, where he would take on the lightweight champion Islam Makhachev in a champion versus champion matchup that would ultimately turn into one of the most high-level bouts of that entire year, where Islam Makhachev would get the decision victory, but it showed that he was in fact human, as Alexander Volkanovski not only had success in the bout, but nearly finished Makhachev. And then in the summer of that same year, Volkanovski would return to his home of 145 and defend his title for a 5th successful time. This time, a absolute beautiful performance over Yair Rodriguez, who was the interim champion at that time, and he would finish him via TKO. And so then what does Volk do? He doesn't defend the featherweight championship for a 6th time. He instead takes a short notice fight back in the 155-pound division against his former foe, Islam Makhachev, in a rematch. But this time, it wasn't a 25-minute absolute incredible war. This time, it was a decisive finish on the side of the lightweight great that is Islam Makhachev, where he would knock out Volkanovski in the first round with a nasty head kick followed up by punches on the ground to put him away. But even still, that's up a weight class. That's at 155. That's on short notice against the best fighter in the world, Islam Makhachev, who still to this day is the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter on planet Earth. But instead of taking a little bit longer of a hiatus following this knockout loss, Volkanovski would go back to 145, look to defend his title for a 6th time, and he would take on the surging undefeated Ilia Topuria last February in 2024 at UFC 298, and this time Volkanovski's reign would officially end in the featherweight division, as Ilia Topuria would prove just how elite that he is by not only beating Volkanovski, but becoming the first man in the featherweight division to beat and finish him in the UFC, and he did that in the second round via nasty knockout. And so here we are, present day, April of 2025. Volkanovski has not fought in 14 months. He will enter this fight having lost 3 of his last 4. But as you can tell, when that curtain is peeled back, you look at the circumstances. It's an all-time classic against Islam Makhachev, up a weight class. It's a finish loss to Islam Makhachev, up a weight class and on short notice. But then you look at the loss to Ilia Topuria, and that is where we can begin to discuss whether or not time is slipping away from Volkanovski, as he did lose at his own weight class. He did lose to the younger, fresher, up-and-coming fighter in Ilia Topuria, and that is exactly what Volkanovski will find himself across the cage from again this coming weekend at UFC 314. The younger, fresher, up-and-coming prospect looking to showcase his skills to the world. And that is where the 30-year-old in his prime, Diego Lopes, enters the conversation, as he will come into this fight at UFC 314 on the tails of a 5-fight win streak. We first were introduced to Diego Lopes on short notice at UFC 288 in May of 2023, where just on, less than a couple of weeks, probably even less than a week's full notice, he takes on the undefeated Movsar Evloev, and not only does he put up a fight, but he nearly wins and finishes Evloev late on with a submission. Ultimately, yes, he does lose the decision, but he immediately put himself on the radar of mixed martial arts fans, and then it didn't take long to capitalize on that momentum, even in a losing effort, as he would have 2 more fights in 2023 and finish both of his opponents in the first round. One was a first-round submission against Gavin Tucker, and the other was a first-round knockout against Pat Sabatini, who just had a big victory this past weekend at UFC Vegas 105 to hold himself right on the edge of the top 15 at featherweight. And then in 2024, it would truly be the year of Diego Lopes, as he would go 3-0 with 3 victories over top 15 opponents. It started at UFC 300, the biggest card of all time, where he would finish Sadiq Youssef. And how could we forget his International Fight Week extravaganza at UFC 303 last June, where he was scheduled to face Brian Ortega. Then Brian Ortega was having trouble making it to featherweight, so then they agreed to fight at lightweight. And then in the morning of the fight, we learned that Brian Ortega would just have to withdraw from the fight altogether, as he was ill and could not get his weight to come down enough even to make lightweight. Then it seemed that Diego was just going to be off of this International Fight Week card, and then on about 4 hours notice, we learned that Dan 50K Ige, who's also competing on this weekend's UFC 314 card, would step up, and these two would fight at a catch weight of 165 pounds, and they would go back and forth toe-to-toe for 15 minutes in one of the best fights of the night. And Diego Lopes would come out the victor, but it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, because Dan Ige gave him everything he could handle and then some. And then Diego would get his rightful shot at Brian Ortega that he didn't get in June. He would make good on it at Noche UFC, at the Sphere, at UFC 306, and he would put on one of the most clean performances of his career so far, and I say that because we got to see him do it for a full 15 minutes, where he hardly ever faced adversity and really beat up Brian Ortega from minute 1 to minute 15, including nearly putting him away in the opening seconds of the fight. And that is what would launch Diego Lopes into the top 5 of the featherweight division and into title contention, where we see him today, now ready to challenge for featherweight gold. So we have the aging veteran, soon-to-be 37-year-old Alexander Volkanovski, looking to showcase his skills and say that he is still amongst the best of the best at 145, that he can still beat whoever that the UFC puts in front of him, including fast-rising prospects such as Diego Lopes. And he's looking to prove that his chin is still there, and there's none better to face that challenge against than Lopes, because he will come in quickly when this fight begins, guns blazing, looking to take Alexander Volkanovski's head off. And if Volkanovski can survive that, if he can show that his chin is still holding up, and that he can only be put away up a weight class or against the hardest puncher at 145 in Ilia Topuria, then I believe that he can turn the tables of this fight and make it a very long night for Diego Lopes, who is yet to be tested over the course of 5 rounds in his 6-fight UFC career thus far. And even over the course of 3 rounds, we've seen him waver against Dan Ige and just a little bit here and there against Brian Ortega. And you have to bring in the experience factor for Volkanovski, as he has truly fought nothing but the best fighters in the world for nearly 5 years in a row. And this will be Alexander Volkanovski's 10th consecutive championship fight between 2 weight classes. That is a benchmark that is hard to reach in the UFC unless you are amongst the best of all time. And over the course of those 9 straight title fights heading into this 10th one this upcoming weekend, 5 of them have gone the full 25 minutes, and we've never seen Volkanovski look tired even the slightest bit in any of those. This is a huge fight for both fighters. Obviously, gold is on the line. Championship around their waist is on the line, but also for their career trajectories, it couldn't be of more importance, of more significance. Volkanovski, should he lose here, probably never gets another crack at the featherweight title, and maybe even gets another crack at gold in general, even if he moves up to 155 to finish his career. And for Lopes, while I'm not saying this, if he loses to Volkanovski, will eliminate him from ever challenging for a title again, but I think it absolutely sets him back because of all of the other moving pieces in this featherweight division currently, including the still undefeated Movsar Evloev, including Patricio Pitbull versus Yair Rodriguez on this very card that may just be a number 1 contender fight, including Jean Silva versus Bryce Mitchell battling for a spot in the top 13, including Dan Ige versus Sean Woodson battling for a spot in the top 15, and including in a couple of weeks Giga Chikadze and David Onama battling for a top 10 spot. If Diego Lopes loses here, it halts his momentum and it sets him back behind multiple fighters, not to mention Lerone Murphy, who improved to 16-0, 8-0 in the UFC after beating Josh Emmett last week and launching himself in the number 8 spot in this division, seemingly 1 win away from a title. There are just a lot of fresh faces. There are a lot of fresh matchups for Volkanovski should he become the champion, and pair all of those factors together, they don't go on the side of Lopes, they go against him. It doesn't get better than this right now in the featherweight division. Obviously, we could have gotten the rematch between Volkanovski and Ilia Topuria, but Ilia Topuria decided to hand his belt over to the UFC and chase 155-pound greatness, hopefully against Islam Makhachev this summer. Fingers crossed. One of the greatest fight IQs of all time in Alexander Volkanovski versus the fast-starting, ruthless Diego Lopes. I almost said ruthless aggression there, the WWE side coming out of me for this one. This is everything that you can think of. This is everything that you want to see in a high-level mixed martial arts bout where the threat of knockout is present, a threat of a submission is present, a threat, or at least not to us, but the opportunity for a 25-minute all-time classic is present, and everything in between. There are truly numerous, infinite amount of possibilities and outcomes in this specific title fight, given the skill sets of both of these fighters and what they have showcased to us so far in their careers. And so now it's time to turn it over to you and for you to give me your predictions and your thoughts on this UFC Featherweight Championship main event. Will it be Volkanovski righting the wrongs, becoming a 2-time champion, and showcasing that he is still the greatest featherweight of all time and that he can still compete with the who's who of the current state of the featherweight weight class? Or will it be Diego Lopes, who in the entirety of the UFC may just have some of, if not the most momentum going right now, and on a 5-fight win streak, he has catapulted himself into superstardom, paired with his coaching capabilities on the outside of the cage and his fan-friendly fight style. Can he become the new Mexican champion / Brazilian champion and further cement himself as one of the biggest names in mixed martial arts present day? And now let's get into the other 5-round fight on this card, and while it's not for gold, it is for a top 10 spot in the most stacked division in the UFC, the 155-pound weight class, as Michael Chandler will look to right the wrongs of his most recent performances in the UFC, but in order to do so, he will have to take out the momentum of the surging Paddy the Baddy Pimblett. Both of these guys took the UFC by storm in their UFC debuts. For Michael Chandler, he debuted in January of 2021. Crazy to think that that was over 4 years ago now, UFC 257, headlined by Dustin Poirier and Conor McGregor Part 2. And he launched himself, quite literally, immediately into title contention when he knocked out Dan Hooker in just 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And I say quite literally into title contention because in his second UFC fight, he found himself standing across from the then champion, Charles do Bronx Oliveira, where they would go to battle. And in the first round, Michael Chandler nearly finished Oliveira numerous times, but it did not matter because Oliveira survived, advanced to round 2, and within 19 seconds of that second round, he would put away Chandler via knockout up against the fence. Then Michael Chandler would come back in November of 2021, so a 3-fight year for Chandler, one of the craziest years in the history of any UFC fighter, by the way, in terms of the storylines and all of the hype and momentum, win or lose, was this year for Michael Chandler. And he would face Justin Gaethje and go the full 15 minutes in an instant all-time classic in Madison Square Garden, a fight that I have a poster of hanging on my wall to the left of me. So now all of a sudden, the big name free agent signing from Bellator, the former champion, was now 1-2 in the UFC, but he would right the ship, he would bounce back and get one of the most vicious knockouts in the lightweight division's history with a front kick finish over Tony Ferguson just 17 seconds into the second round of their fight at UFC 274 in May of 2022, but not before nearly being finished himself again in the first round by Tony Ferguson, and this of course was during the stretch of Tony Ferguson's UFC career where the downside was showing. And then for his second consecutive trip to Madison Square Garden, he would now, Michael Chandler that is, find himself across from not Justin, but Dustin. Dustin the Diamond Poirier would finish Michael Chandler via submission in the third round after a blood and guts war. And that is where the drama surrounds Michael Chandler's UFC career, because from November 12th of 2022 until November 16th of 2024, just last year, a few months ago, we did not see Michael Chandler fight one time. And that is because he got himself involved in the Conor McGregor business, or lack thereof. He would find himself coaching across from Conor McGregor on, I believe, season 31 or 30, I can't remember at this point, there's so many seasons, of The Ultimate Fighter, where they would compete on the show for 6 weeks, I believe, in real time in the house, 12 weeks if you're watching on television, and then they were supposed to fight it out at the end, like not all, but a majority of coaches have done in seasons past. But week after week, month after month, and what seemingly felt like year after year from 2023 to 2024, this fight would never come together up until International Fight Week, UFC 303 in June of 2024. Conor McGregor, Michael Chandler. The poster was created, the tickets were sold, the promotion was behind this massive fight to headline International Fight Week. And then we would learn that Conor McGregor would have a broken toe that would force him out of the bout and keep Michael Chandler out of the octagon for more time. And so Chandler would finally give up on the Conor McGregor business and take a fight in November of last year in a rematch against Charles do Bronx Oliveira, and in what his words stated as a #1 contender fight, and he would lose over the course of a 25-minute co-main event. This was one of the best performances of Charles Oliveira's career, in my opinion, especially from minute 1 to minute 25, because usually we see him going in, facing adversity, and then turning the tide and finishing his opponent. But in this one against Michael Chandler, he pretty much dominated the entire fight until the 5th round, where Chandler found some late success. And so now Michael Chandler comes into UFC 314 with a 2-4 record in the UFC and having just one fight in the last 2 years. And he's taking on someone who is surging, who is 6-0 in the UFC, who is 8 years younger and has finishing capabilities on the feet, finishing capabilities on the ground, and tons of momentum behind him, Paddy Pimblett, England's own. Much like Michael Chandler, Paddy Pimblett took the UFC by storm in his 2021 debut that came in September of that year and got a first-round knockout, much like his opponent Chandler. That would then lead him to 2 more finishes, one in the first round and one in the second round. Starting his UFC career 3-0 with 3 finishes, but that is what got him to his fight with Jared Gordon, and that is where the doubt started to creep in, and that is because he was essentially awarded a robbery victory over Jared Gordon at UFC 282 in December of 2022 in a fight that pretty much anyone that you ask felt that Jared Gordon did enough to win, but it was not even a split decision. Not even a single judge gave it to Jared. It was unanimously decided for Paddy the Baddy. Then we wouldn't see him again until nearly 1 year later to the day, December 16th of 2023, where he would get his first big step up if we're talking name value and stardom, and that was against Tony Ferguson, and he didn't finish him. He got a decision win. So that victory where he couldn't put away the guy in Tony that was really falling off in his career, and he got awarded a robbery decision against Jared Gordon, those 2 fights paired back to back did not do a lot of justice for Paddy Pimblett's career trajectory and fandom. But in my opinion, he put all of that doubt to bed in July of last year at UFC 304 in front of his home country in England, where he would not only beat Bobby Green, he would not only finish Bobby Green, but he would submit him and put him to sleep in the very first round, and it only took 3 minutes and 22 seconds, and that is what would get Paddy Pimblett into the top 15 of the world's most stacked division. And now here he is, one of the biggest names in the lightweight division, taking on one of the other biggest names in the lightweight division, Pimblett versus Chandler. This fight is guaranteed to be fireworks. There is no way that I can foresee this fight being a snoozer, being boring. There's just too much finishing capability and prowess for both of these fighters. Michael Chandler has quite literally been in nothing but fight of the night contenders in his 6 UFC bouts, and the ones where they weren't fight of the night, it's because he was either starching his opponent or getting starched himself. And for Paddy, he's finished 4 of his 6 UFC fights, and overall 16 out of 22 with 10 via submission and 6 via knockout. In his prime right now, battle-tested in the UFC in my opinion, versus an opponent that couldn't be more battle-tested in Michael Chandler across 2 of the world's greatest promotions, Bellator and UFC. He has fought nothing but quite literally some of the best lightweights in the world over the last decade. This fight is massive for career trajectory because Michael Chandler, I mean, let's be honest here. If he loses, he's 2-5 in the UFC, and he wants to remain relevant. He wants to keep himself in the discussions for title contention. I'm not saying that if he beats Paddy Pimblett, he's going to be launched into a title fight next, but he definitely keeps himself 1 more win away given his name value. And for Paddy Pimblett, this is his chance to launch in to the top 10, to launch into the discussion of elite status in the lightweight division, to be considered one of the best lightweights in the world, because for many years and for many fights, there's been a lot of doubters, a lot of haters, and a lot of naysayers saying that the hype of Paddy Pimblett just doesn't match the skill set. And he can put all of those narratives to bed this weekend at UFC 314 if and only if he can beat Michael Chandler. So give me your thoughts not only on that main event title fight, but for this 5-round co-main event between Michael Chandler and between Paddy Pimblett. How do you see this fight playing out? Will it be the high-level experience of Michael Chandler paying dividends here, or will it be the 8-year age gap for Paddy Pimblett that ultimately proves to pay dividends for him here, as he is the younger, fresher fighter coming into this fight with more momentum, looking to make a claim that he is amongst the best of the best at 155 pounds, a claim that many people across many organizations wish that they could put next to their name. If you enjoyed the breakdown of these 2 5-round fights at UFC 314, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Every single week I break down the best fights and talk about the best storylines and what is at stake heading into each weekend, and in the aftermath I recap all of the most meaningful results from every card, and I give my thoughts and opinions on MMA news and fight announcements. You can also join the community on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok, and you can follow on your favorite audio listening platform where every Monday and Friday podcast episodes are released there. Have a great weekend, enjoy the fights, and I will catch you all in the next video.